Right. Hey guys, welcome back to my series. Today we will be continuing our session from yesterday. All right. So for those of you who are already familiar with these series, right, we're basically going to focus on discussing IELTS questions in order to help anyone who's currently in preparation, trying to prep for the test. Hopefully, it will increase your chances of scoring a band 7 or higher, right? Even a 9 is not an impossible target for anyone watching this. Okay, so yesterday we did writing task one specifically for tables, right? And the title of that video is, it says table and pie charts. Fortunately, we didn't have time to do the pie chart, so we are going to do that today. So we're continuing off what we did yesterday. Now, just to recap a little bit, right? And at this point, I don't need to really repeat a lot of the things. Feel free to check out the previous sessions that I did. I went through all the tips and tricks and things that you should do, you should not do, regardless of what type of charts or information that you receive in the question. But I would love to kind of just recap a little bit of what we did yesterday, right? We went through a table question and we did the don'ts and also the steps, the approach that you need to do in order to answer the questions. And we also kind of see a really good answer, to be honest, right? Really good answer that showcase everything that an IELTS examiners would love to see, including how vocabularies are used, the range of the vocabulary being used, right? It's pretty great here, right? So please, if you want to kind of check out how that is done, feel free to just rewatch the previous session. And we are going to do the same step pretty much just to prove that the approach that have been used all this time for this type of question works, right? All right, so I'm Hafiz from Exad Education, and we will be doing IELTS writing test one today, specifically for pie charts. Okay. Now we've already established a lot of the fundamentals, right, in previous videos. So I'm going to basically just mention them rather than highlighting them again, right? And then we'll immediately implement how those fundamentals are basically observed and decided, um, and how it influenced your answer at the end. Okay, so this is pie chart data, right? So first thing that you have to always remember is that regardless of the chart type, you need to look at things that the question is asking for, right? And in task one, it's the same thing every time, right? The main features and highlights. So data that stands out, data that stand out, or data that you can use for comparison and contrast. Okay, so those are things that you immediately need to identify. So let's take a look at what type of data that we can find here, right, in type of pie charts. Now, I've also highlighted a couple of points in regards to what those data look like. The easiest being the biggest, the highest, or the smallest, or the lowest, right? That is like the most obvious thing that you can see, right? First thing first, go along with that and just see what you can highlight in that category. So, first things first, sorry, is actually understanding what the data represents. So, I'll always read the title, right? Units of electricity by fuel source in Australia. And then there's a second set of data, units of electricity by fuel source in France. So, it's actually two different countries, right? They talk about the same information, units of electricity by fuel. Okay, and then there are two different dates, 1980 and 2000, right? And then they will indicate as well the total production. Okay, now you have to take a look. Of course, whenever you get that type of data, like the the sets, right? There are different sets basically. So you get like two actually different sets of data that you have to take a look at both and try to make comparisons, right? So if you kind of just take a closer look at here, right, the first one is in Australia and the second one is in France, and there are two pie charts for both, one in 1980, one in 2000, and there are different categories for each pie chart. So basically, the type of fuel, coal, oil, natural gas, hydropower, nuclear power, and so on. Now, immediately, right, you can see that in each set there are clear distinctions, right? Significant differences. So for example, in Australia, right, in the second pie chart, you can immediately see there's one here that says 130. Now, don't forget, you do have to understand the unit as well. 130 here does not necessarily mean like no number, right? Actually, it never means like no number. There's always a unit there, right? So this is literally the unit names is unit, so total production, the number of units being produced. So out of 170, 130 is coal, right? So that's like the biggest. And the smallest, you can see there are two here, is that is most likely it's hard, but that's probably oil, right? And then if you kind of take a look at 1980s, it kind of showcased almost a similar trend, right? So 50 units for coal and for oil 10. Now do note that there are sorry that there is one difference, and that is in the year 2000, the lowest are two types of fuel, uh, oil and I think natural gas, right? But in 1980, the lowest is clearly only oil, right? Only oil. Now, when you are doing IELTS task one and you see this kind of data where you almost see a similar trend, but there's usually just one difference, one small difference of one of the categories, one of the units, one of the legends that is not following the same overall trend as the other units or category. Now that is okay, right? What you need to do first is you basically highlight the similar trend first. Okay, so basically for both 1980s, for the units of electricity by fuel source in Australia, right? Both show that the most dominant is coal, that's number one, right? And the least dominant is oil. That's the same trend for both. That's something that you have to highlight. Okay, and then you can also do the same thing with the one in France. You can immediately see here, right? The biggest is nuclear power, right, with 126 units. But for the year 1980s, that is actually not the case, right? Nuclear power is the second lowest, and here you don't even get something that's dominant, right? The most dominant being natural gas and coal, but oil is not far off. So this is actually a good comparison to make, something you should highlight first, right? So in the year 2000, like the dominant unit is natural gas. Compared to 1980s, 20 years ago, right, there isn't actually one single dominant fuel, right? Dominant fuel. Um, Coal and natural gas uh, have the same number of units, right? So that is the comparison that you can make in your essay as well, right? And then in terms of the lowest, that's where we actually find some similarity, right? So the lowest being hydropower, and that's pretty much the same, right, in both years. Okay, there's also again there's one difference, so don't forget, right, when it comes to the answer itself, you should never simply state the fact, as in just plain out state what the fact is in regards to the solid number. So, for example, your essay should not simply say, all right, in the year 2000, there's 130 units of coal. You're stating the fact, yes, but you're not doing anything with it. right? So there is a line always in IELTS task one where it says that make comparisons where you can, right? Or where it is necessary. So that's actually like almost in every paragraph, right? So that's something that you have to do. So make sure you do that. So first step uh, of your approach is to understand the information, the facts that are given to you, and then highlight the main features, right? Just exactly as we did, the biggest, the lowest, the anomalies, right? The huge differences, the consistent number, etc., etc. Okay. Now, once you have done that, then you can immediately move on to the structure. Okay. As a reminder, right? We can actually just take a look at the previous note that we made, right? So it's recommended to write five, but if you only manage to write four, that's completely fine. All right. The first paragraph should be the introduction. Remember, this is only paraphrasing the question statement, right? Or the chart production. Paraphrasing. So what does that mean? You cannot add anything new, anything outside of that question statement that you receive in the beginning of the question. Okay, and then the second paragraph must be an overview. So in here, you don't really write any numbers apart from identifying maybe the category or the legends, right? So for example, one of the legends that we just saw was the year, right? So you can put that in, it's fine. Or like coal or oil, like the type of field, but don't mention the number of units, right? Do not mention the variable. Um, and then the third one is specifying the trends, mains, highlights of the data, which is something that we did. Like just brainstorm that in the first 5 minutes, right? Make sure that you have as much data as you can identify. Remember, they have to have that characteristic of being important, being something that stands out. And then the fourth paragraph will be basically just the second set of the trains or main highlight. And then in the fifth paragraph, should you kind of push for a fifth, maybe because you haven't reached 150 or you're not above 150 just yet, right? Then you can have a second overview here. It says no numbers, but if you ended up putting in numbers there as well, that's completely fine, right? So as long as you're not repeating what you said in paragraph two. That's a crucial point. If you ended up saying the same thing or the same type of trend, right, anywhere in your answer, whether you repeat something you said in paragraph three and paragraph four, right, or something you said in paragraph two, you repeat it again in paragraph five, that is a mistake. And so that is something that will push your band down. Okay, so make sure that they're all different. They're they're all different, and that you are maintaining that characteristic of having only the main highlights and features. Okay, now once you have done that, you can basically immediately jump to the questions. Sorry, to the answer. Right, and we're gonna do that exactly right now. So here I have a sample answer of the question. So we're gonna actually dissect this and see how this person managed to answer the question. And again, as usual, we will be calibrating it with the rubric, right, that I have gone through in a previous session. That's something that you have to make sure you never forget and that you're constantly checking your answer and kind of just pitting it against the rubric, right? Because the rubric is what the examiners are asking for. So if you fulfill all the criteria of the rubric, you will get the highest band possible, the nine. All right, so let's take a look at the first paragraph here. Right here, it says the pie charts compare the amount of electricity produced using five different sources of fuel in two countries over two separate years. Okay, so first things first, of course, you want to make sure that you identify the type of information, the chart, right? You have to mention it. In the previous question, it was the tables. If it's you get a bar graph, you say bar graph, and then after that you have the verb, right? And this is where you can kind of play around. Well, not exactly play around, but have a lot of options when it comes to the verb immediately after the chart that you mentioned. You can say compare, represent, illustrate, outlines, describe, of course, again, depending on the information that you have, right? And after that, you have the brief description, right, of the chart, right? You're not coming up with this on your own, of course. Literally, all you have to do is just come up with a way to paraphrase title of the information. Right? Usually, you will have like a sample, sorry, question statement at the top, right? And then all you have to do is just paraphrase that. But here you can immediately see, right, the amount instead of units, because that was what was used in charts, and the person changed it to amount, so really good, of electricity produced. Right? Uh, so stick with production, produce, that's okay. Using five different sources. Using five different sources. So the person immediately kind of show how many sources there are. That's fine as well, right? In two countries over two separate years. Now, do note, right? Here, it's the person says two countries. If you want to specify the country, that is completely fine. Like you can kind of rewrite this and say using five different sources of fuel in Australia and France over two separate years. Right? Or you can also specify the year in 1980 and 2000. Right? That's fine. But this person decided just to kind of make it a little bit generic over two separate years, which is also okay. Now, if you ask, like, well, which is better? Do you want to specify, or just stay generic? Personally, for me, I would prefer it to be specified, right? Not too much though, right? Just enough to see the clear context of the information you're summarizing, right? But in this case, like two countries over two separate years, right? Because you didn't mention the countries just yet or the years, it's kind of difficult to introduce it a little bit later, right? But this person did exactly just that. This person introduced the two countries and the 2 years in the second paragraph, right? So I would have loved that actually to be introduced in the first paragraph, because that will add to the cohesion. Because readers, and when they get introduced something in the first sentence, they want to know what will come after, right? So if you already mentioned what the two countries are, the two separate years, now they can immediately expect the overview in the second paragraph of that data, right? Instead of like thinking like, what are the two countries? What are the two separate years? But let's take a look at how this person write the overview of the chart. So that's the second paragraph of IELTS Task 1 structure. Total electricity production increased dramatically from 1980 to 2000. Now you can see here that this is the only numbers that the person mentioned, right? Because this is an overview. So you're not specifying any numbers in regards to those variables. And one word here that kind of indicates as well, or what type of vocabulary or what kind of word you need to know for IELTS, is this kind of um, expressions, right? This type of word that emphasize, that kind of highlights the, I wouldn't say drama, but rather kind of showcase how crucial a piece of information is, or how insignificant they are. Right? You get words like dramatically, um, significantly, and so on and so forth. Right? It's a little bit difficult on top of my head, right? But that's one type of word that you really need to memorize for IELTS Task 1, right? Because you might use it several times throughout your answer, especially again to describe like the those kind of changes, changes that feels a little bit dramatic. Okay, so make sure that you prepare your arsenal of words for that category in both Australia and France. Now, here is where the person introduced the countries, and here is where the person introduced the year, right? So that would have been also kind of uh, work if it was introduced in the previous paragraph. While the totals for both countries were similar, there were big differences in the fuel sources used. Now, again, take a very careful look at the second sentence here in the second paragraph. While the totals for both countries were similar, total, right? 190, 170, 180. So he's not wrong. Okay, so this person is not wrong, he or she. Right? They are similar. They're the thing that you should not say is they are exactly the same. Right? Can you say almost the same? Yes. Right? Um, Basically just try to practice saying the same things in different ways. There were big differences. I'm not a fan of the word big, right? In the English dictionaries, there are like so many words that you can change big with, right? So, for example, there are significant differences. I always like that kind of word, like significant, emphatical, um, like drastic, etc. Right? There were drastic differences, significant. Those would have worked better for me in the fuel sources used. But is it wrong though to use big differences? Not really. It's just that big is used quite casually, right? And this is almost like an academic summary. And if you kind of think about like a thesis or a research, it's very rare that you will see the word big when it kind of correlates with something scientific, right? So in the lexical resources, this person will not receive a bad score by any means or like a standard score. The person will definitely get a good score. It's just that this is something that might prevent this person from getting a perfect score, right? If you and remember, when I say like words like significant, drastic, those are not one of those bombastic words, right? Those are pretty common words as well, but they are more commonly used in formal situations, such as an academic summary, okay, in the fuel sources used. Okay, so in terms of the sentences as well, like take a look at the transition category number two, cohesion, right? While the totals, that word, just that one simple word, while, makes that transition from the first sentence to the second sentence really smooth, right? Because that also indicates comparison, right? That indicates clear comparison, something that the question is asking for, right? The question is asking for comparison. So that word of while indicates that. So kind of fulfill what is being asked. Now let's take a look at the third paragraph. Coal was used. Uh, I want to highlight this a little bit because one of the most common structure that you will definitely use in IELTS Task 1 is passive, right? Because you usually wouldn't use active sentence for research. A lot of research, or almost all research, are going to be passive sentences, right? So that's something that you should always remember as well, right? Passive sentences, but it shouldn't be simple passive, right? You should still make your sentence complex. So let's take a look at this first sentence. Coal was used to produce 50 of the total units of electricity in Australia in 1980, rising to 130 out of 170 units in 2000. Right? This person added a clause after it, a subclause, almost like a subclause. Actually, this is a subclause, right? So it's not just a simple passive sentence. So in grammatical range, this person showed a good range in that manner, right? And then in regards to the numbers itself, let's see how this person does it. 50 of the total 100 units, rising to 130 of the 170. Now you might think like, well, why didn't the person just say 50 of the total 100 units. There in the first, that's okay. And then the second one, you say rising to 130 units. Well, don't forget, they have different totals. One is 170, this one is 100. That's clearly different. Right? So that person need to make that clear, of course, because if that person had said that the data rose or rising to 130 without mentioning the total, that is misconception. That is misrepresentation of the data. You will lose marks for that. Your task fulfillment will go down, right? Because you're not summarizing the data correctly, right? So it is the structure itself does feel repetitive here, right? But do note that this is the unit of the chart, right? And it's pretty difficult, especially when it comes to specific units. You might not be able to change it. So what you can change is the structure of the sentence. But make sure it's delivered differently. So here you can see coal was used to produce, and then in the second part, this person used rising to, right? Immediately start with a gerund in the subclause to 130, right? Instead of a verb to be with a simple verb, and then repeating the trend. But this person varied the structure, right? Because if the person had written it similarly, for example, like this: coal was used to produce 50 of the total 100 units of electricity in Australia in 1980, and then rise to 130, rise to, and then rise to, right? That is less variety in regards to the grammar, because that's pretty much the same structure for both sentences. Right here, it isn't that case again. And then please note here, right? Take a look at the tenses a little bit. So in the second paragraph, right, this is past tense, right? You can see it's pretty consistent. Increased, um, were, were versus use, right? And then in the third paragraph, consistently also with past tense, right? Um, this is a gerund, so not a, you can't really see the tense there, unless you compared it with the previous sentence. So that counts as past, right? And then if we continue the second sentence, by contrast, nuclear power became past tense, right? Most important, producing almost 75% of the country's electricity. Now, if you take a look at the first paragraph, the pie charts compare. This is present. Right? So this is just a reminder yet again. This is right? So just a reminder again that the first paragraph must be in present tense, present simple tense. Okay. And the rest of the paragraph, especially when you are referring to the data, you have to switch to past tense. Please do not forget that. I have seen that being overlooked very easily numerous times. Right? It has to be consistent. Don't immediately have that hesitation where like, but I'm describing the data right now. Should I have some sort of present simple here? No, you should not. You're summarizing the data that has already happened. So your entire paragraph, body paragraph, should be in past tense. Okay, and then okay, let's continue then with the second sentence. By contrast, oh, love that, right? By contrast, on the other hand, meanwhile, right? However, etc. Right? That is a good phrase to use when you are trying to show two contradictions. Okay, so you need to kind of follow this template, basically. Nuclear power became the most important fuel source in France in 2000. Right? And then if you take a look here again, there is a slight variance in the structure, sorry, in the grammar. In the first part, in the first sentence, coal was used using subject in passive form, sorry, object in passive form. But here in the second sentence, by contrast, nuclear power became, right? So it uses it used as an active sentence, using putting the object in the place of the subject, right? The most important fuel source in France. Now, this is where you have to be careful a little bit, right? It says this person said became the most important fields. But if you take a look at the charts very carefully, right, it is probably debatable on whether that is factual or not, because you're only seeing the production. Yes, you might say that's equivalent, like the higher the production, the more important it is. Yes, right. But it's still something that is not stated or shown by any means on the charts, right? Now, again, we can debate, like the analysis and stuff, but basically, what I want to highlight is the awareness, right? That if you want to put something there, make sure that there is some rationality in how the charts is presented. Now, luckily here, yes, this is talking about fuel. The more fuel that is consumed, logically, it is the more important, it is way more important than those less, uh, than those consume less, right? So if this person did that, yeah, most important field source, right, the examiner might agree, right? Like, or there is a likely chance that the examiner will agree, right, and say that okay, this is still highlighting the main features of the charts, right? But if you had received a completely different set of data, right, make sure that you don't say things that are completely off the chart, because that is not going to help you in the task fulfillment category, right? So you have to think to yourself, does that expression make sense, right? If you ended up making an analysis, that's a big red flag. That's a no-no. Do not make your own analysis, right? I've also mentioned that in the previous session. Okay, in France in 2000. Producing here in the second part, the person used a gerund as well and a subclause, so almost a repetition. Well, basically a repetition of the first sentence. Almost 75% of the country's electricity. But this is where the person, kind of go like, I'm gonna make it different this way. That is the presentation of the data, right? Because here you can see the presentation of the data for the first sentence is the number of units out of the total. But in the second sentence, right, you can clearly see the first is an expression, just an overall expression, a generic expression. But the second one producing almost 75%. So this person uses a fraction. Now, does this count as an analysis? Well, if you can see it clearly on the chart, yes. But if you can see it clearly on the chart, it doesn't. It's pretty much you just trying to pitch or present the data in a different way. So producing almost 75% of the country's electricity. So if you look at France's in the year 2000, yeah, that's definitely almost 75%. So that this person is not wrong, right? Okay, so in that regards, the data presentation is completely different from the first sentence. That counts as grammatical range, okay? And that's really good, right? So making sure that you present your summary in different ways every time is crucial to you getting a high band, all right? So let's take a look at the third paragraph. This person has 5 paragraphs, right? I think I should mention that in the beginning. But let's see if that kind of computes, right? See if the reason justify the means. Okay. Australia depended on hydropower, and okay, let's take a look here. Depended, okay, and in the previous paragraph, the most important. So this person continuously make that attempt to present or to use different wording every time. Really good. Right? On hydropower for just under 25%. Person repeated one of the method he used before, which is okay, right? I've said that numerous times. If you do make repetition, it's fine. Just make sure you don't make it more than twice in your entire answer, okay, of its electricity in both years. But the amount of electricity produced using this type of power fell from 5 to only 2 units in France, right? So if you kind of take a look at the trend, the overview focus more on the um, dramatic increase, 1980 to 2000, right? Total electricity production. So both showed a significant increase. And then the huge difference or the significant differences of the portions of each fuel type. In the second paragraph, it focuses on the significance, right? On the highest data, the highest numbers, so or the highest changes, right? 50 to 130, and then here nuclear became the most important fuel resource in France, so the most important fuel resource in France. So this is like the biggest value, right? But in the fourth paragraph here, Australia depended on hydropower for just under 25%. So let's take a look at Australia, right? And let's take a look at hydropower, which is the strip, and it's this one for both here. So this in the fourth paragraph, the person switch it up and focus on the smallest value, right, of its electricity in both years, but the amount of electricity produced using this type of power fell from 5 to only 2 units in France. So the person made, sorry, my bad. The hydropower is this for Australia. For France, this one. Right? So for both of the countries, the person focuses on the smallest value. So this person is being consistent. Right? That's also a very vital point for every single paragraph that you write. Is that the data presentation that you write has to be consistent in its main topic and its subject. So let's rewind a little bit and make sure of that. Right? In the second paragraph, right? Again, the overview focuses on the main highlights, right? The dramatic increase of electricity production consistent for both countries, right? And the differences in the allocation or the portion of each fuel type. Also, the same trend with both countries, right? They both have significant differences in the fuel types in the year 1980s and 2000. So that consistency is shown there in the second paragraph. In the third paragraph, coal was used to produce 50 of the total, right? Again, this is focusing on the most significant, the highest value, the highest number, right? For both Australia and France, right? And yes, the person did write by contrast, so a contrasting, but nonetheless, they still this person still focused on the largest value, on the biggest value, on the biggest on the basically the fuel that is produced the most for both countries. It's just that the type of fuel is significantly different. Okay, so that is still a consistent topic. So far, paragraph 2, 3, and 4, they the topics written or the main focus of each paragraph has been consistent, right, for each one, and that's something that you have to achieve, right? One thing that I've seen a couple of my students do is that they would discuss two different topics in one paragraph, right? So for example, right, if I were to use the same question here in the second, okay, in the third paragraph, usually the third paragraph they will try to fit in the highest value and the lowest value, right? Like trying to fit those in together into one paragraph. That's usually very complicated, right? And it usually doesn't work, especially when one of the rubric that you're trying to achieve is patient, right? And when you have two different contrasting topics in one paragraph, you are not going to achieve that at all, right? Because now the reader has to kind of look at both sides, right? And sometimes the comparison doesn't even work because, again, it's a different set of data. Okay, so one paragraph should focus only on one topic, on one of the types of information, whether you're focusing on the highest values, the lowest values, the consistent trend, the fluctuating trend, right? Or the anomalies, like the biggest change, the least change. Those should be one paragraph each. Okay. And then if we kind of look at the very last paragraph, oil, on the other hand, remained a relatively important fuel source in France. Remain a relatively uh, important fuel source in France. Okay, let's take a look at oil. Oil, the black one in France. This one is 20. This one is 25. Right, but its use declined in Australia. Both countries relied on natural gas for electricity production significantly more in 1980 than in 2000. And you can see here, this is like 170 words. Right now, in the last paragraph, you can see here that this is a completely different information. Right, so this person did not right try to force this context into the previous paragraph. Right, because again, if you add a 5, that is okay, right? But what you need to make sure is that the last paragraph also feels like an overview. So that is exactly what this person did, right? So if you take a look, how do you know it's an overview? There are no numbers, right? There's only the year here, similar to what was written in the second paragraph, right? But it focuses on just oil and natural gas. Now, is there a common uh, theme, right, in those two types of data, right? Yes, there is. Right? So, number one, when it comes to oil, right, it's very contrasting, right? Oil in France is very important, but in Australia, it gets diminished, right? But for both countries, when it comes to natural gas, they both increase, right? So this paragraph is focusing on the anomaly, right? So basically, there are two drastic uh, representations of the data in both countries, right? So that is something that this person tried to force it in, right? But could this person have just focused on oil or natural gas? Yes, absolutely, right? But again, it all depends on the number of words, right? If you have not exceed 150 or if you're not far away from 150, keep on writing, right? Or add one more from one more of sorry, add one more set of data that you can highlight, right? You have to be safe and make sure that you're just maybe at least about, I would say, 20 words above 150. I would say that's a good recommendation. And some people will or have achieved before like 180 words. Right? I would not recommend reaching 200. Right? That's probably a little bit too much. Right? But 170 is a good number. 170, 175. Right? And then if you feel like you haven't reached that, then you can keep on adding. Right? If you have, then you can stop adding. Right? And again, don't forget, yeah, you can write 5 paragraphs, right? Or you can just stay with 4. Right. The important thing here is the delivery, is the answer, whether it has answered the questions, how fluid your answer is, have you shown enough range and accuracy for both grammar and vocabulary. Okay, so based on all the analysis that we did on this answer, this is also a solid 8. So we have actually seen 2 sample answers that are solid 8. And if you want to also achieve the same band for IELTS writing task 1, please feel free to check out the link in the description below. In HSET Education, we provide a lot of really useful courses with training videos, valuable templates, precise instructions, materials on things that you should do, you should not do, right? All of these are available and it will be unlimitedly available to you once after purchase. It's very affordable compared to other institutions and it's self-paced. You get to use all of this material according to how you learn best. Right? And last but not least, one of the best thing about HZ education is that it's money back guarantee. If you don't achieve your goal, you get your money back, no question asked. And trust me, when it comes to IELTS, you want to reach your goal, right? So if you fail, you kind of um, probably don't want to get back some of the money you wasted, right? But with HZ education, trust me, you are not going to fail. in achieving your target band. Okay, anyway, that's my time for today. Right. Hopefully, those of you who have watched or are watching or watched after the live stream ended find this training useful. Please leave a comment or and a like for this video if that is the case for you, right? And I look forward to seeing you all again in the next session. Please do tune in if you have been finding all of this session useful, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment anytime. I'll try my best to answer it in the next session. All right, thank you very much. Take care, everybody.